Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lina and today we're doing my first quarterly wrap-up. So I never read enough books in a month to do like a substantial wrap-up. So I decided to wait until I had enough books, and luckily it coincided with the end of winter, and so I think I'm gonna do like a seasonal wrap up. I think I'm gonna make it a habit. So without further ado, let's get into. So the first book I read in 2021 was an audiobook. It was called Fly on the Wall: How One Girl Saw Everything by Lockhart. It's a young adult book. So it's about a girl who's in high school. It's like a art and performing arts high school. So she's struggling with her identity, her schoolwork, and her family life, and also boys. And so one day she makes a wish that she could be a fly on the wall in the boys' locker room. And so her wish actually comes true. And so that's kind of her story, what she sees when she's in the locker room and how that changes her outlook on her life and like on other people as well. And it's kind of a funny book because it reminded me a lot of the like comedies that have a very like on the nose reference to what is actually going to happen. Like she's in English class and they're reading The Metamorphosis by Kafka, where she like the main character turns into a bug. And so it's very interesting that like there are always those parallels, and I thought it was like quite fun and entertaining, but nothing more. It was published in the early 2000s, in 2006, and like it looks and feels very 2000s, like the way they describe what they wear, the slang they use, even kind of the politics and like the gender dynamics feel 2000s. And it's like a nice capsule. It was fun, nothing more, nothing less. It was a nice book to start the year with because it wasn't like too high stakes and it wasn't a total disappointment. So yeah. Then the next book I read, totally different, In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. I've talked about it at least 3 times already on this channel. It's a memoir where she chronicles her abusive relationship with another woman, and she basically uses the metaphor of the house to talk about the different moments in this relationship, and she uses a lot of like references to literature, different forms of media, pop culture, to essentially like try to make sense of this relationship on a personal level, but also on a cultural level. And I think it's like such a beautiful exploration of like queerness and how it interacts with like violence to an extent, but also like it's not at all like it's a difficult topic, definitely, but the way she writes and also the way she tells it, I listened to the audiobook first, it's just like super compelling, and it's like organized in few short chapters where you have like it's told more or less chronologically, and every chapter kind of ties back to something else. So there's this chapter where she goes really in depth about like the gothic novel and how like the house and domesticity is like a fraught place or fraught space for like womanhood, and like how it is a ripe space for abusive relationships to arise. And so it's very like it goes really in depth, it's very beautifully told, it's kind of playful with how it uses language and story structures and narratives. So like Honestly, I would recommend it to everyone. Like, please read this book. Then, weirdly, I read another memoir, this time by Kat Marnell. It's called How to Murder Your Life. It was published in 2017. And then I learned that it's called like an addiction memoir. Kat Marnell is basically this writer. She was a beauty editor at like a few magazine in the Condé Nast group. Then she was like an online beauty editor at XO Jane, and she also wrote for Vice. And basically, it's a memoir that goes like from her childhood, growing up in this very privileged WASP environment with two parents as mental health professionals, to her life as like a beauty editor. And at the center of this is her reliance on Adderall and her addiction. Okay, sorry. I was running out of space. Yes, so her reliance on Adderall, her addiction, and basically how she became this person who was doing a lot of drugs, getting into like extremely dangerous situations, being taken advantage of by men and other people. She became like a person who would be verbally abusive to her colleagues, blow past deadlines all of the time, and she went to rehab like 2 or 3 times before the last time where she went to rehab, where she actually wrote How to Murder Your Life. And so it's an interesting book because it is at the same time somehow kind of glamorizing the life that she led, because she led a socialite life. And at the same time, it's like recounting a lot of grim moments that she went through with this tone that's very like magazine writing from the 2010s, like very like conversational, friendly tone. And it's very jarring to read, although it's entertaining. At the end, like I was a bit like, okay, like it gets kind of tiring and repetitive, which I understand because in a way that's what a lot of addiction is, like going into like into unhealthy patterns of repetition of unhealthy like behaviors. But I think what interested me the most about it was like the privilege aspect. Obviously her parents were very rich, her grandmother kept like bailing her out of difficult situations, and I think it's an interesting book because it's like the story could never be told by someone who wasn't like a super privileged white woman. Like no one could get away with the things she does if she wasn't like Kat Marnell, basically. And so I thought it was interesting, and it really towed the line between being like kind of a cautionary tale but also an aspirational story, because in the end, despite like going through addiction and rehab and like those difficult things, well, she still got a book deal out of it, you know? So it's a very weird book. I would advise it for people who like magazine media from the 2000s, like The Devil Wears Prada, 13 Going on 30, and like Sex and the City type thing. It's very like New York, hustle, fashion, beauty oriented. So that might be fun for you. Then I read some poetry. I read Homebody by Rupi Kaur, her third poetry collection. I read Milk and Honey last year, and it's kind of based around the same themes and the same like structure. It's divided in like 4 chapters, and she talks about like trauma, family, like sexuality, mental health to an extent, and like migration and her identity as like a Punjabi Sikh woman. And so I didn't like it. I kind of knew that I wouldn't like it, but I actually really had high expectations. Rupi Kaur's poetry is like very simple to the point of like almost being simplistic at times. To me, it lacks a lot of substance. So that's one thing. It's like, I mean, I have a lot of things to say about this type of poetry. Wait. No, my mic was facing the wrong way. Great. I hope you can hear this. So yeah, that was an interesting book to read, but honestly, if you don't like the type of insta poetry that it is, I don't read it. And I do plan to make a longer video about homebody, rupi kaur, and just the phenomenon of insta poetry. So that's in the works. Next, I read King Kong Theory by Virginie Despentes. I already talked about it a bit in my last haul. Virginie Despentes is like this controversial French writer, and this is kind of her feminist manifesto. She published it in 2005, and it basically talks a lot about sexual violence, pornography, sex work, men-women relationships. And it's interesting because she weaves in like theory and a lot of her personal experiences with those subjects. And so a lot of times I was like maybe shocked. Yeah, shocked by what she was, not shocked, but like she writes in a very crude way and she doesn't hold back at all. So that's one thing. And I think for those types of subjects, it's not very easy to read. It's not an easy breezy read. She touches on aspects of feminism that I think are often overlooked for less difficult subjects. So I think in that way, it's a necessary book. But I do think that her theoretical background is questionable. At some points, she makes references to some writers that I would like to think we have moved past. But it was published in 2005 and it's sadly still relevant today, especially in the French feminist landscape, which is still like super transphobic and anti-sex work. So yeah, it's an interesting book. I wouldn't advise it as like a feminism 101 book. It's not like we should all be feminists. I think for someone who already has a grasp on what feminism is but wants a deeper look at it, that's an interesting book to read. Then I read A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. He's a playwright from Norway, and this is a play. I already talked about it in my haul as well, but it's a play that when it was published in the late 19th century, was considered kind of shocking. And when I read about it, it says that like when it was played in Germany, they had to change the ending. It's basically about this woman who lives in this house with her husband and her two children, three, I don't know. Yeah, her children, and she has this secret that she's been keeping from her family, and it's around Christmas, and this secret kind of is threatening to undo like the equilibrium and the balance of their family. So I know that like the fact that it's happening around Christmas is interesting because in Norway, Christmas is like a huge familial celebration, so the themes of family and the domestic life are very present in this. I mean, it's called A Doll's House. So, and it is like kind of a feminist work, even if Ibsen didn't intend it to be. A lot of feminists have kind of appropriated its message that's a lot about like bodily autonomy and agency and like also especially as it relates to money. And it's an interesting play. I think to read it like for me it was a bit weird to read a play, but I would love to see it played and to see especially how they would do like the set design of the house. Then I read a poetry book that I got off of NetGalley. It's called Please Come Off Book by Kevin Kantor. It's a poetry collection that was published like 7 days ago, yeah, on the 23rd of March. And it touches on topics of like grief, sexuality, gender identity, trauma, sexual violence, through the prism of theater. There are quite a few poems in there. I really liked it. I thought it was like very raw, and that there was something that was very private about some of the poems, and it felt like you were really like in the intimacy of the narrator to the point that it was kind of uncomfortable at times. But I think like it really goes deep into like what it's like to experience some of these things in a way that is not, that can be harsh, but there's still like an underlying tenderness to it. I thought that like the form was interesting. I think the fact that I used a lot of conventions of theater but used them in poetry was interesting. There are a few poems also that kind of do the thing that Apollinaire does in his poems, which is like write the poem in the shape of like something that is mentioned in the poem. Like there's a poem that talks about Guitar Hero and it's in the shape of like a guitar, and one that talks about like boats and it's in the shape of a boat. So that's one thing. I really liked it, and definitely you should read it if you like what do you like, yeah, you should read it if you're really into theater. I think a lot of the references were lost on me because I'm not a huge theater reader, or I don't have like theater culture. That's one thing. And also, if you like the idea of like taking classics and like queering them, I think you would appreciate this collection. And finally, the last book I read, which was in a way the biggest disappointment of this season, was The World is God's Language by Dane Cervine. So it's also another poetry collection that I got off of NetGalley, and it's basically, I don't even know what it's about really, because I kind of checked out a third of the way through. It started off being like vignette of the author's childhood, and then about like his travels throughout America, and then outside of America, I think South America. Sometime he went in Asia. He also went in Europe. I mean, he traveled a lot basically. And although I did like the first few poems about the poet's childhood, I think at some point I got really tired of the language. It was using literary devices and poetic language in a way that felt overthought. Like the words were a surplus and the metaphors were like added as an afterthought and then didn't really mesh with like the meaning. They felt like pure embellishment, and I felt like they didn't add to my understanding. And even sometimes I felt like they were here to obscure the meaning and make you like have to decipher it, but not in the way that like it has layers, but just it has like one layer, but it's like wrapped in like so much useless stuff. I also really hated the narrator of those poems because I feel like the way that the narrator or the speaker, that's the speaker of the poems, looked at other cultures and other parts of the world felt really othering. I think I like felt while I was reading it that it was a white man writing it, and I wasn't wrong. Like this like male white gaze was so present in the writing that it was like distracting me and disturbing. Like I felt to some extent that I was reading the diary of Gauguin. I don't know if you know the painter. Basically, he went to Tahiti and he had this idea of like how life was in Tahiti as like a kind of untouched like heaven from industrialized Western countries, and I really felt that same like illusion of what other cultures are. Like the fact that I don't think that like you can't write about something that's outside of your culture, but I think I felt like it was pure borrowing, like picking and choosing and not really considering the cultures as like a holistic thing. I don't know. I was really like not impressed by it, and I haven't reviewed it on Nagali yet because I'm trying to find a way to say those things like in I don't know, like polite way, but I really hated it. It's not badly written, but God, it was like painful to read. So yeah. So that's the wrap up for me. I hope you found a few books that maybe could interest you. I'm gonna like put all of the names below if you ever want to check them out. And yeah, if you liked the video, please leave a like. Leave me a comment if you've read some of these books and you have like same or different opinions. I'm open to discussing everything. And yeah, I'll see you soon and bye.